Welcome to Transforming Us podcast. I'm Jess.
And I'm Tamara. We're trauma-informed relationship coaches and old friends here to discuss common patterns and what leads us to paths of security.
You know, people are feeling overwhelmed and disconnected in their painful relationships, which often leads to mental health crises.
We want to share some new ideas and practices to help you cultivate curiosity, compassion, and to redeem the patterns in your relationships, starting with yourself.
Join us on this journey of transforming us. Grab a cup of coffee and let's dive in. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest and a new friend of mine, Dr. Chuck DeGroat. I got the privilege of learning from him for a week recently at the Soul Care Institute, and I cannot say enough about how wise and deep and authentic and real he really is as an educator and a person. So Chuck is a follower of Jesus. He's a husband to Sarah for 31 years, a proud dad to two amazing daughters that are adults now, and fantastic son-in-law. He serves as a professor of counseling and Christian spirituality and directs the clinical mental health counseling program at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan. He's also a faculty member for the Soul Care Institute. Like I mentioned, the retreat it's retreat-based, and I've been investing in that for the last year. He's a licensed therapist, spiritual director, and author of 6 books, including his newest book, Healing What's Within. Chuck has spent over 20 years equipping pastors and churches to navigate abuse, trauma, and spiritual formation, helping people move toward wholeness and flourishing. Welcome, Chuck, to the podcast.
Thanks, Jess. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So after that bio, I don't need to say a whole lot more about your professional life, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about your family and how do you come today?
Yeah, well, my family, so my wife and I are getting ready right now to take a little trip in our motorhome. Got a small, it's so cliche for like a late middle-aged white male, married for 31 years, but we're in that empty nester season right now. And so we're enjoying some of that. I'm technically on a sabbatical from seminary right now. And, we're planning a wedding right now for my youngest, who will be married next summer. And so we're excited about that. My oldest, she's a student of mine in the counseling program, and her husband is a student of mine as well. So they're both getting their counseling degrees at the seminary where I teach. And so, and then my youngest is actually thinking about doing the same program. We'll see if she does or not. But so it's sort of a fun season in our lives where the girls are adults and they're getting married, but we're still very much kind of living our lives together in some really meaningful ways.
That sounds fantastic. I know my husband and I talk often about those times where we'll be able to go travel, and we'll definitely get, I don't know if it'll be a motorhome. It might be a school bus that we renovate or something like that.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, one day.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say before, if our wounds go unhealed, we will distribute our woundedness to others. Pain that isn't healed is hurled in every direction. And I think it was Rohr that said, what's not transformed is transmitted.
Yes,
so
yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit about developmental trauma and pain.
I mean, that Rohr says it so beautifully, right? What you don't transform, you transmit, right? So good.
Yeah. So in talking about developmental trauma, the idea of the divided self, or this, what happens when we have to put on those masks, we have to, we start developing those strategies, and then that's all a result of these attachment wounds. So for those of us that didn't experience secure attachment in our earliest relationships, what is your take on what that means relationally within yourself, with others, and God?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that whole idea of what we don't transform, we transmit, goes back to my very first conversations in my own counseling program, my own counseling work. 25 or more years ago now. And really a bold professor and the clinical supervisor and therapist, and just a whole team of people I think it took back then to sort of shine a light on my own family history, my own insecure attachment. Back then, we weren't talking as much about trauma, developmental trauma, complex trauma, but I think that's what they were shining a light on. And I think the reality of the inner divisions is one that goes back really early for a lot of us. If there's pain and you're not met in that pain, in other words, if there's not a compassionate witness to the pain, particularly in the form of your parents, um, you find some sort of way to cope, right? And for some of us, that means the division becomes sort of a public self, or a more sort of outward facing self that is um, can look fawning and people pleasing and performing and entertaining, or whatever it is. It can look lots of different ways, and a private self or a not so outward facing
Mm-hmm.
self, that holds a lot of pain. And I think I was really fortunate, if that's the right word, to have multiple people begin to name pretty early on that split, that division in me. And, and not just to name like, how they were experiencing me on the outside, but to say we actually think that there's actually a lot more going on inside of you, shame and sadness,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, and as soon as they started putting words to that, I think for me, I still remember the first time I was sitting with my professor in his office, and I still think there's a stain from my tears in that very space where I just bawled and bawled for probably 5 or 10 minutes as he named the pain that I'd been carrying around but not acknowledging. And so I think a lot of us go through life. I was fortunate to be 27 when that happened. A lot of us go through life for 20, 30, 40, 50 years before uh, seeing that divide within. And that can be really
Mm-hmm.
painful. And, well, our untransformed pain ends up being transmitted all over the place, hurled all over the place onto people in ways that harm and hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's so central to the work that people want to do within relationships. Um, you know, the pain from our childhood, the pain from unmet needs, the pain from false
Mhm.
beliefs, the pain from unconscious motivations, all of it, that's we're not aware of.
Mhm.
It it comes out sideways. You come out, you act like a child in your marriage. You get overwhelmed by your kids, you snap with somebody at work. It's so very human, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
looking back at those pains and the attachment stuff from your past is really such a great place to start in a
Mhm.
lot of the healing work, at least what I've learned and what I've learned from you and your book. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And that oftentimes, I mean, I think for me, it probably in some ways began with how I was living in a way that was hurting others, right? So for a lot of us, it's like we're caught in those ways of coping and those styles of relating that have perpetuated over 2 or 3 decades. They show up in our relationships, and sometimes in really painful ways for our spouses and our friends. And so
Hmm.
it takes some of us just being caught in the act, so to speak, right, to begin to get curious.
Mm. And it feels like it's more painful to open those things up at first.
Mm,
But at least what I've found in my own therapy work is that you can almost breathe easier, like talking about the parts within, or the children that didn't have the needs met and
mm,
things like that with your spouse. It makes it less me versus you and a little bit more
yeah.
objective and like something to be curious about.
Yeah. Like we're in this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think a really helpful tool for that type of work has also been, for me, and I think for you as well, is the tool of the Enneagram.
Hmm.
So you use that in some of the things that you do, and it's helped you in your own journey. What has been your experience using the Enneagram to understand your patterns and how it has impacted your relationships?
Yeah. I was thinking about the Enneagram yesterday. There was kind of a silly post online. You know how the Enneagram gets used for all sorts of different things nowadays, and it was being used to like describe different seminaries. And I thought I was going to do this post. My experience with the Enneagram in the 90s, the 2000s, the 20 teens, and now the 2020s.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really evolved. I mean, I do think back in the day, it was just sort of this mysterious wisdom tool that um, no one was talking about. I mean, obviously, we weren't online in the ways that we are online now. And I remember I've got stacks of books in my office back at the seminary that are like early Enneagram books that never made it big, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I was kind of excited as it got more. As people used it more, as it became more well known, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
it's evolved over the years, obviously. Um, I I don't like that it's become sort of this cliche personality test, like what's your spirit animal? You know, it's
Right.
been so diminished, I think, by
Yeah.
some of the contemporary ways that we use it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and yet you and I both, I think, have been impacted by it in ways that invite a deeper knowing. You know, our
Mm-hmm.
deeper motivations. That it's not like discovering, oh, look how cool, I'm a force, so that must mean I'm a poet and I'm artful and I'm romantic. um, but to see the dark underbelly of the four, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
to have to really wrestle with hidden motivations and desires and so forth. I think that's where the Enneagram has taken me over the years. I think whether or not it's going to continue to be a fruitful tool is a big question mark for me right now. I mean, I've taught
Mm-hmm.
it for a lot of years, and I'm not teaching it anymore for that reason.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's best used by people who know it well, have used it in their own life, right? Um, who've been apprenticed in it by someone who knows it well, and who is a good steward of people's hearts, you know, because there is a wisdom, and there's an old book going back to the late 1990s, early 2000s by a guy named Simon Park, a British guy. Another one of these Enneagram books that didn't make it big, but
Wow.
I remember him talking about how the Enneagram will hit you between the eyes like a 2x4 if you really engage it wisely and well, and it will
Yeah.
expose the illusions of your life. And I think by and large, that's what the Enneagram has helped me with over time. It's not as some sort of personality test,
Mm-hmm.
but in exposing some of the illusions of my life. And it continues to over the years too,
Mm-hmm.
as I've gotten into the subtypes and I've recognized that I'm a self-pres subtype. Um, I do less with the wings nowadays than I would do with the subtypes, but recognizing that you know, if you look at it through the lens of wings, that there's some three energy that I bring. I've been an entrepreneur and I've started multiple things over the course of the years, and so there's a little bit of a dance between 4-3 or 3-4 that I do. That so
Yeah.
as you've experienced it too, I'm sure it's like a you can pull on a thread and just keep pulling and have a lot of fun with it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I resonate so much with everything you said about the trivialization of it. And
Mm,
I think when you first said that, I was like, every decade and especially the rise in social media and things like that, and just how everybody's got to take something and rebrand it and make it their own. And it's
mhm,
just the wisdom tradition that it originally began as this tool to not type other people or like use it to show off. It
yeah.
was to know yourself deeper, to actually
Mhm,
get things out of the way. I interviewed somebody a couple days ago, and he said it's like addition by subtraction,
mm,
and that you're getting stuff off that's not supposed to be there to
mm,
be able to reach God, to be able
mm,
to know yourself truly, and to be able to have real relationship with other people
mm.
without all the other stuff attached, you
Yeah.
know.
So well said. Yeah.
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 And I would also say too that that I really liked what you said about it should really only be used in the context between a safe relationship and someone who
Mhm.
can really attune into somebody's heart, because without that, it can become a weapon, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not to say, oh, and you and I are both fours. You know, I've shared that on the
Mm,
podcast. I'm a four. Used to lean heavy wing three, but I have a lot of five now.
mm,
Um, and you know, it's not a box that says this is who I am and this is
mm,
fixed, but it tells you at least the patterns of where you're at, and um, gives you options and resources for where you might want to go instead. You know,
mm,
paths to security, and like you mentioned, the subtypes, being aware of where you find your safety when you feel triggered, things
mm.
like that.
Yeah.
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 So thanks for
In
sharing
those
a little bit
ways,
about that.
yeah, I mean, the ways that you use it, in the ways that I think both of us have discovered it being really helpful. Um, it's so beautiful, right? In those conversations that we have and in intimate moments with people we care for.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just like everything else. I mean, it just seems to, as it becomes more popular, it's trivialized. That was your word, right? I mean, I
Hmm.
think that's a really good word. It's trivialized. Yeah. So,
Yeah. And it
um,
is sad. I kind of wish you could wipe all that stuff away and get back to the original way it was taught, but you can't
yeah.
really control that, can you?
No.
So, you and I both know that people consume a lot of information when it comes to
Mm,
psychology. They're really good at intellectualizing, and they think that's healing, just
yeah.
learning a bunch of information, reading a bunch of books. Why is paying attention? You mentioned this in your last book, Healing What's Within. Why is paying attention to the body in our nervous system so important?
Yeah, this is a missing piece that has been sort of uncovered in the last 15, 20 years or so. But if you go back to the early church, I mean, a lot of the work was very much engaged with our bodies, our desires, our. So it's interesting, when I was trained as a therapist back in the 90s, we were not talking very much about our bodies. We were talking about our feelings and our stories much more. In some cases, in other spaces, our thoughts, our lies, and things like that, which can be helpful too. But as we've better understood that we're embodied people, and that our brains and bodies are implicated in this thing we call life, and there's been this, I think, really important um, and growing awareness that, as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. Or as I sometimes say, the body tells a story, a particular kind of story. Like your body carries within it in the unconscious ways in which you cope, our default ways of relating, a story, and so I think as we begin to pay attention to our unconscious habits, for instance, we discover, as a pastor recently discovered that I was working with, that he's lived his life in fight mode. Um, he called it passion. He called it righteous anger. He called it decisive leadership. But as we've worked together more, he realized, well, that actually goes back to my earliest years of life. That goes back to a way that I learned. Like it was in his family. Conquer or be conquered in some respects, even at like 3, 4, 5 years old, which is really, really sad. And
Mm,
so what has been interesting is for this man to begin to discover that in his body there is this default kind of energy, aggressive energy that he feels, is really tied back to a way of coping, that began at ages 3, 4, 5 years old. And so, yeah, discovering how our body has helped us survive over the years, and how we've learned to adapt, discovering that we can tend to get stuck in a kind of survival mode that keeps us in exhausting default patterns of relating that are not meant to be our primary way of relating. These can be really important to our growth, but it takes not just paying attention to our thoughts or our emotions, but to our somatic sensations and experiences.
hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely found that tuning into the body is actually the most effective thing
Mm,
for me as a 4. Um, it can be difficult when triggers and emotions and things like that from the
mm,
past come online, and then I'm stuck in emotion and then thought processing, and it just kind of toggles back and forth.
mm.
But if I can like stop all that and just pay attention to the sensations in the body, and but it gets discounted by so many people because they don't want to slow down. They feel like they don't necessarily see how the body has important information to tell them, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and so as you described in your work with the gentleman you mentioned and the
Mm,
fight mode, we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We have all these trauma responses that come up, you know,
yeah.
in moments in relationships, right? So
Yeah.
if a person learns to tune into their body and notice when they get a rush in their chest, or they get like clenched jaw, or they get like a heaviness in their stomach, and like what those things mean, how do you think that has a impact on relationships if somebody can use that information wisely?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the paying attention part, I guess, right? That's the curiosity part. Like I think um at first you might not know the connection between that, that sensation in your gut or that lump in your throat to anything else, right? But we simply begin by honoring that. And I think what a lot of us discover is that we cut ourselves off from our embodied sensations a long time ago. They were practically shouting at us at one point in life to wake up and to pay attention, but we become disembodied, disconnected from our bodies, right? And so I think is in the work that I do, at least, we'll often just begin by acknowledging and attuning to that pain and becoming more comfortable, sort of allowing it to be. So the work is really slow.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we talk about this work being titrated or paced. The work is slow, but as we allow ourselves a growing curiosity, there may be a sense of like, oh yeah, that gut sensation that's been around for a while. That goes back to fill in the blank, right? And that's where we're sort of off to the races at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with a woman. I've had a lot of situations like this over the years with people who've worked on very toxic Christian organizations or church staffs, where it's like, oh, I've had this feeling in my gut for 10 years that I've ignored, right? That as we begin to pay attention, she's like, oh yeah, as I noticed that, that's like my body communicating to me that this isn't good. But I learned to turn that off, in my abusive home when I was 5 years old. So I've just functionally disconnected from my body's wisdom. And so,
Mm.
as you say, we begin by paying attention, by being curious.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about in my own story that turning off of the signal of anger was like
Mm,
big it was such a big thing because I got the message in different ways that anger is wrong or it's bad,
mm,
you know, or, expressing frustration even. It's
mm,
like that has to get shut down. And so, um, and my parents they are amazing. They're wonderful people, but I just think, they have their story and they have their
mm,
triggers, and so on both sides, they each had a complicated relationship with anger. So me
mm,
expressing it, I just kind of became the good girl and that appeasing. Um, but now as an adult, and I think when you are in a position where you're no longer a child anymore, that that rush of anger feels much bigger than it did when I was younger. And it was like I had to keep it pressed down, turned off.
yeah.
Now it's like, whoa, I'm allowed to express it now, but what's the right volume and how? And
Yes.
and the Enneagram and attachment work and all of this and paying attention to the body has
Yeah.
helped a ton in navigating that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And that takes a lot of courage to do, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of scary, right? Once you first start to go down that road, like, what will I discover about myself? What story is my body trying to tell, right?
Yeah. Well, it's unfamiliar. And I
Mhm.
think anything that's unfamiliar, nobody wants to do, right? Because you're like, I don't know
Mhm.
what to expect. I don't know what's going to be around this corner or inside that box. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
I think anything that's unfamiliar does take courage. Um, and anybody that does healing work, it takes
Mhm.
courage.
Yeah.
So, did you want to share anything about? In your book, you talk about the different states in the body, like fog and storm.
Mhm. Mm.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Fog
right.
and storm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think yeah, part of what happens when you start paying attention, right, is oftentimes I start with what I call the dashboard, paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, our behaviors, and our relationships, just to kind of run the gamut. And that all of that gives us some sense of what might be going on underneath, sort of the hidden story our body is trying to tell us about what state we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And the state get simply put, the states that we can find ourselves in vary between more sympathetic states like fight, the classic fight or flight kinds of responses, fawn, which is growing in recognition as a legitimate trauma response, which looks more
Mm-hmm.
like people pleasing, um, and find, which looks a little bit more like dependent clinging to someone else for some sense of identity. So I call that the sympathetic storm,
Mm-hmm.
or the dorsal fog. The dorsal vagal system, a part of our parasympathetic system, but more of a disconnected space than a self-protected space like our sympathetic state. And that's where we find ourselves in more of a freeze or fold response, where we begin to shut down. We want to pull
Mm-hmm.
away, disconnect, numb, resign. This is when I wake up in the morning and I want to pull the covers over my head and not not leave my house or go to work. Or
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important as we grow in curiosity about those bodily states, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, to understand that underneath there are bodily sensations, I should say. Underneath are these states that we live in that are survival states. And for some of us, and this is the tricky part, for some of us, they're very temporary. They're there to get us out of a jam. For others, that's where we've lived for 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, I work with people who are like, I don't know that I've ever lived in anything but a sympathetic storm. I don't know that I've lived in anything but a dorsal fog. And so, if you grew up in a home, as we were talking about earlier, where there wasn't secure attachment, chances are you might have found your way into a survival state that has become the norm for you. So, like this pastor I was talking about, like fight is the norm. That's all he's known over the years. For others who are like, well, I don't have as much energy as other people. I was working with a woman who was like, yeah, I just never had a lot of energy. I think that's just kind of a genetic thing. And as we got curious, it was like, no, that's actually a survival thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you could diminish, if you could be small, you wouldn't have to attract the attention of your abusive dad. And so get small, hide away.
Mm-hmm.
You end up 20, 30 years later in a marriage, in life like that.
Yeah.
It's not genetics, it's just a way of coping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when somebody starts balancing out some of those energies of either fog or storm,
Mm-hmm.
um, they show up sometimes different in a relationship, and it confuses people. Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
doing healing work and you're always small and you're always low energy, and you start speaking about some of
Yes.
the things you
Yeah.
need, and you start expressing frustrations or, things like that, now all of a sudden you're not how you've always been. Um, but it's good. It's worthy work.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think people get scared because then they get a pushback from their relationships when they
Mm-hmm.
start showing up different.
That's right.
That's
Which
hard.
can be tricky, right? Because it can be re-traumatizing in some ways. If we push people too quickly to, for instance, find their voice, right, which I'm
Hmm.
all for, and then they start using their voice, and other significant people in their life or people in their workplace start pushing back. It can be not just re-traumatizing, but it might lead a person to say, that's why I shut down in the first place. Why are you, Chuck or Jess, telling me that I need to have a voice when the reality is it's a lot safer when I just get small.
Yeah.
So, wise coaches, wise counselors, wise spiritual directors will walk with people in a way that mitigates that risk, so to speak, while at the same time moving toward courage. And I think that's a really tricky part of this work that we do, is
Mm-hmm.
finding that nice balance, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love how your friend Andy Colbert says, at the pace you are able.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So
right.
it's good
Yeah,
stuff.
that's it.
Yeah. So if attachment's not fixed and can change, why should we work towards what you call in your book realized secure
Yeah,
attachment?
yeah. Sometimes called well, often mostly called earned
Yeah.
secure attachment, which sounds a little bit to me like something that you really have to chase after and work hard for. But I think most of us who discover the beauty of attachment discover that we realize it in relationship with someone who sees us, the gaze of another, and maybe even the gaze of God, And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, and the question is like, how can we change? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Some version of that? Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is sometimes when we talk about these things, I've seen it. Well, we were just talking about the Enneagram. Now let's talk about the other side of attachment. I sometimes see people using attachment theories in attachment theory in ways that look a little bit more like personality testing, like you're just an anxious type or you're just an avoidant type, as if that's another fixed thing and that's just your personality
Yeah.
and the rest of us have to deal with you. And the reality here too is that we weren't meant to live in that survival state, and our bodies are really adaptable. In fact, our bodies, um, how would I put this in lay language? Our bodies are like inclined to move toward true north. Our bodies are inclined to move toward health and wholeness. Our bodies want to move toward wholeness. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you can cooperate with your body in an intuitive movement toward wholeness, toward connection, what you begin to recognize in safe relationships and co-regulated relationships is that something within starts to shift. That state that you've been in of turmoil, that sympathetic storm, that anxious attachment that you've lived in begins to settle. And I've got enough time working with people over the course of years where they'll say, in our first year together, I was like at a 9 out of 10. It felt like my body was like at a hurricane, category 5 hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, I was sort of at a category 2 or 3, but the winds were still blowing pretty hard. Now I feel like maybe on particular days I'm a tropical storm, but most days I'm a pretty calm wind, and that feels
Mm.
good. And so, by the way, weather metaphors, meteorological metaphors, geographic metaphors, landscape metaphors can be really helpful sometimes to
Yeah.
people as they're working through stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I agree. I picked up the book Landscapes of the Soul by
yeah,
Jeff and Sid Holzclaw, which I know you're friends with them, but
yeah.
their metaphors in that have been really beautiful too.
Hmm.
And it's got me thinking about the hot and cold of sympathetic and dorsal. And then
Mm,
in our Soul Care Institute, um, a woman sitting next to me, her metaphor was like a swimming metaphor of
mm,
um, like a rapid
mm,
swimming versus like a floating. Or well,
mm,
for her, the dorsal was sort of like sinking, right, in the depths,
yeah,
but the good kind of ventral safe place was more of that, just like floating on the surface
yeah,
and not trying to make too many things happen, but just enjoying being on the surface of the water.
yeah.
So
I love that. Yeah. And I think that's important to say too, is I think as we get connected to real lived embodied experiences of what you just named as a ventral state, a state of connection.
mhm.
That's our physiological our nervous system, social engagement system, right? As we get
Yeah.
uh, connected to that state, as we feel the beauty of that state, there's a sense in which our body's like, oh, that's it. That's where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Can we spend more time there? Can we get back there? It feels like a vacation for your body. I'll often say to my clients, we chase after this feeling by going on vacation, and often find ourselves more exhausted after a vacation, right? But you can find your way to a vacation for your body and soul if you find your way to ventral, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a really beautifully soothing and reorienting state that washes over you in a way that allows you to feel resilient and connected and attuned. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And at least for me, in my experience, it's almost like the pressure's off, the tension and the vice of trying really hard, like just relaxes.
Mm,
And you're just able to be curious and calm and kind and connected and all the
yes.
things with
Yeah.
people, with yourself, and with God.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Well
yeah.
said.
So, also in your book, Healing What's Within, you touch on 3 core questions.
Hmm.
So, I could share what those questions are, or you
Yeah.
could teach about it. What would you prefer?
Yeah. I'll share briefly what they are, and we can go into them if you want to a little bit more. But the 3 questions that God asks begins with the question, "Where are you?" Which is so interesting if you think about it, right? Because you'd expect, as that story is often told, that God is rushing after Adam and Eve, like, what the hell have you done?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a question of immense curiosity. The word there in the Hebrew is actually the same word for, you might say, heartbreak. And so it's God moving toward Adam and Eve with longing, with heartbreak, missing them,
Mm-hmm.
longing for reconnection, longing for reunion. So where are you? This keeps us in the present moment, right? It doesn't take us to why, how did you get here? But it really keeps us in that place of, I think it's an important question, by the way, for counselors, for coaches, for friends, that invites us to sort of check in with where we find ourselves, even in the present moment, followed by who told you, which is to say, whose voice have you been listening to other than my voice?
Mm-hmm.
What stories have you believed about yourself other than the story of worth and belonging and purpose that I whisper over you? And so, another really kind question that takes us just a little bit deeper. You might say that the first one maybe gets at our state, the second one gets at our story, and then the third question really gets at what's stirring underneath and how we're trying to satisfy those deeper stirrings. The question in your Bibles will ask, have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you to eat from? But
Mm-hmm.
I translate that as, where have you taken your hunger and thirst?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, in your state of anxiety, disconnection, dissatisfaction, shame, where have you gone to satisfy your thirst? Where have you
Mm-hmm.
gone to cope? And that's a really important question that invites confession at some level. But notice that that's not where God begins. God begins with presence, with attunement, with relationship, with regulation, and then gets to the questions become increasingly more challenging, right? In a sense, requiring us to really ask, okay, so where have I gone? Like, and that's not. Let me just frame this in a way that I hope is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's usually where some people exhale and they're like, "Oh, good, you're talking about sin now." And I want to say, yeah, I'm talking about sin, but I'm trying to understand it from a place of empathy too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how did we get to that place of coping in the ways that we cope,
Yeah.
of grasping after the things that we grasp for? Um, Usually, those behaviors, so to speak, are um, mere signposts to what's going on underneath, right? Our
Right.
state of disconnection, our anxiety. Um, and so, yeah, there are questions of profound curiosity and compassion, which I don't think most people equate with Genesis chapter 3, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
in my Bible, at least at the very top, it says the fall. It's very ominous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good, and the way you described it in teaching at the Soul Care Institute too is it's a sort of examine, like Saint Ignatius
Hmm.
had an examine
Hmm.
of your day, but it's taking those questions from Genesis to ask. Yes, we all have strategies, right? So you get to that last question, where do you go with your hunger, or where have you taken your hunger and thirst? It's like, I'm going to escapism, or there's substances, or there's even just busyness and accomplishment. Like, these are all things that can be almost addictions, so to
Yes.
speak,
Yeah.
and not to use that lightly, but we all have the behaviors that are, like you said, just a result of
Mm.
something deeper,
Yeah.
and those needs and longings.
Mm.
We have to see them and hear them.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
you mentioned confession, and it makes me think of a part in your book where you talk about communities of redemptive remembering.
Hmm.
Do you want to say a little bit more about what you would say that
Yeah.
really looks like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as I think about remembering, I'm thinking in a very deep sense, remembering all the way back in a very C.S. Lewis sense, all the way back to the echoes of creation, God's original whisper over
Yeah.
us, that big D desire that wells up from within, that longs for beauty and goodness and connection,
Mm.
um, and I think if God's image whispers over us worth and belonging and purpose, and if we've grown up in homes or been formed in relationships that don't speak the same things over us, that contradict our inherent worth, belonging, and purpose, we need to find our way back to relationships and communities that remind us of who we are,
Mm.
remind us of our God imaged worth and belonging and purpose. And that's kind of rare to find a community like that. It's important. Who are those people in your life, the friendships, the partnership, the marriage, the mentoring relationship, the coach, the therapist? Who are the people in your life who can invite you to remember who you are at your
Mhm.
depths? And so that I think that's it. How can our communities become communities of redemptive remembering? Which is to say, how can our communities remind us of who we are at the depths? Well,
Mhm.
not minimizing the ways that we hurt, harm, cope, sin, but always anchored in that reality of who we were created to be.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the hope would be that that's what churches look like, right?
Yes.
You
That
know?
would be the hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet a lot of people don't have that experience. They don't have that safety. Um, I just my community, we just started small groups for the
Mm,
first time in a small church plant at an Anglican church where I attend, and my husband and I are leading,
mm,
and some of the questions we were asking in the beginning, just getting at where people's blocks are when it
mm,
comes to faith communities. And there's a lot of hurt. There's a
mm.
lot of layers there of showing up to past life groups and being told this is a place you can be vulnerable and real,
Yes.
and guess what? It
Yeah.
wasn't actually welcomed when they were,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah,
And
that's
and
right.
what if they would have been met with reminders of their original goodness, and
Yeah.
reminders of, like you mentioned, just that deep ache, that deep desire to be seen, heard, known, and reminded.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think we all long for that. I think it's tough to come by sometimes. Back about 20 years ago, Larry Crabb, I don't know if you know that name, Larry
Hmm.
Crabb, that worked closely with Dan Allender for many years,
Hmm.
did this little experiment where he left the therapy world and went into the church. He really wanted to bring, what all this goodness into the church, and had every expectation that it would become he didn't use this language, but it would become, as we were just talking about, this community of redemptive remembering. If people just leaned in with good motives and intentions and desires. And it wasn't an utter failure, but it was really painful. And I remember talking to him, it's just tears rolling down his face. Like, it's just hard. We're so prone to undermine goodness in all sorts of different ways, right? And so it was a challenging experience, and for him. So yeah, we hold that, we hold hope, but with some degree of caution for a lot of us, knowing that we've been wounded in these very places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very real tension. So, I know recently you have been working on a new book project
Yeah.
regarding a character, which I'm
Yeah.
really interested in,
Yeah.
and it's new, but what can you say about that?
Yeah. This is really a conversation that comes out of my work on narcissism. Most people, by the way, when they think of character, they think of something sort of like just who we are morally, and it's kind of feels like a moralistic kind of conversation, like, oh, you just
Mm-hmm.
want me to be a better person, right? But character used in the psychological world has to do with how we've been shaped. It has to do with how trauma, early attachment shapes the way our habits are formed, the way we
Mm.
relate. So very much what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Um, but character is more like the architecture. Personality is more like the presentation, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
um, character is like the structure. And if we were formed in attachment relationships that were insecure, if we experienced trauma, that architecture can be shaky. And so I'm drawing us into talking about our lives through the lens of character, when more often than not, more recently, we've been talking a whole lot about health or emotional intelligence or formation, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can um, be more aware of the shaping stories that make us who we are, and so that we become more serious about how people change, which is
Mm-hmm.
to say, like, as I've been doing this work over the years, particularly in the area of narcissism, personality disorders, there's this kind of desire for people to change quickly. Like, if I just go on sabbatical or take a quick retreat, I'll be fine. Just need a little rest. I need to read a book or two on humility and I'll be okay. And I want to say, if you experience a particular way of being formed early in life that became the architecture of your character, it takes quite a while to shift that
Mm-hmm.
in a substantial way. And so it's nothing more than saying change takes a while. We really need to take it slow. If we're going to change the architecture of our character, we have our brains and bodies working for us. This idea of neuroplasticity, which is to say that our brains can change, neuronal
Mm-hmm.
patterns can change, but those changes are not instantaneous.
Yeah.
We are not minute rice. We are slow cooked in crock pots. And so that's the long work that I think, if we begin talking more about using more the language of character change, it might be helpful.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. On many different levels. It's not even something that has been that much on my radar, like thinking about learning about character, other than like parenting and like
Yeah.
how can I develop, good character in my kids. But in terms of my own story and like you were saying, these personality structures that develop based
Yeah.
on all those layers, it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah. So when can we expect that to be out?
Well, we're talking about things taking a long time, about a year from now. So we're recording this in September 2025, maybe September, October of
Okay.
2026. Yeah, yeah, it's now in the
Okay.
hands of
So
the
I guess if
publisher.
you're listening to this um in September of
Yeah,
2026, check it out.
check it out right now.
Yeah, no name yet, but a book by Chuck
No,
DeGroat.
yeah, that's right.
um so I'd love to get your thoughts on something. So it has been a joy to just get to unpack all the good work that you're doing, Chuck. And I just really appreciate your time and your
Yeah.
intentionality to teach us.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to all the ways that this episode will bless many who are on the journey of healing what's within.
Yeah. Maybe we
So,
can do a part 2 sometime.
yeah, I would love that. I think that the character and even just a little bit more of complex relationships with either narcissism or something like that, that'd be a really great talk as far as relationships. So,
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah. All right. Well, I like to close our show with a blessing that says, may you be open and aware of everything that comes to you today, welcoming it all for your transformation.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Transforming Us podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation and that you found it helpful. If you loved what you heard, we would really appreciate if you would take a moment and leave us a 5-star review and rating. Your support helps us reach more listeners like you.
And also, don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more relationship content. Then, if you're looking to take your growth to the next level, check out our coaching services and groups at transformingus.org.
We're here to help you transform your patterns and enjoy more secure relationships.
Until next time, in the words of Raoul Shane, you do not need to do big things. Just do small things in a big way. Then transformation will follow you.